So Kevin Lee is making his return and he has called out Mike Perry for a date on July 10th, UFC 264, Poirier versus McGregor 3. Of course, we know why Kevin Lee is calling out someone for that card. He wants to be around the McGregor spotlight to announce a big comeback, get a bunch of praise, and then return to going on to do what he wants to do and rise through each division and try and get back towards the belt. Kevin Lee, right now setting his eyes on the 170-pound division, which is very interesting. He called out Mike Perry, and I'll talk about that matchup in a second, because Kevin Lee moving back to 170 pounds is an extremely interesting move to make, because I feel like he still has a chance of being a top contender in the 155 pound division. At 170 pounds, it's just a little bit risky for him. He's not as big as those other guys. Maybe he has built himself into an 170 pound fighter, because of course before he moved up at UFC Rochester not too long ago, actually quite a long time ago now since his injuries, and tried to take on Rafael Dos Anjos. That didn't go his way, but he also just moved right up from the 155 pound division. He didn't take time off, build himself up, then trim himself back down to 170, and then fight at 170 pounds. So then maybe there's a chance, if he has actually been building himself into a true welterweight. Very tough for Kevin Lee right now. I feel like he would be perfect in an 165 pound division. But either way, he wants Mike Perry, and I don't mind the matchup. I think it's a big fight to make, and it would go very well and look really good on a McGregor card. I just don't like the matchup, okay? And I know that Mike Perry has called out, he's called out Kevin Lee back and said that he wants the fight, but he just wouldn't be able to do it on July 10th, which I do agree with, to be honest with you guys. I like the fight being made. I just don't like it in other ways, though. Like, in terms of just looking at a fight and liking it, I do enjoy it. But there's just so many other layers to this as to why I don't feel like it should happen next for Kevin Lee or Mike Perry. You've got two big names in two different divisions. Mike Perry, Kevin Lee. I know people don't like Kevin Lee, but he is a well-known contender for where he is ranked in his division compared to other guys ranked around him in that division also. Kevin Lee is a known guy, Motown Phenom, versus Mike Perry. I don't think we should be matching up two big names together, because that almost guarantees that one of them is going to lose. Now, it guarantees that one of them is going to win. But I feel like we could make matchups in each of their own divisions against other contenders that are winnable matchups to make, but also don't require them cancelling each other out, because Kevin Lee, Mike Perry, I'd like them both to succeed and thrive. I also don't understand what Mike Perry gets Kevin Lee in terms of a ranking at a welterweight. I feel like he's just trying to call out Mike Perry because he likes the matchup for himself. He sees that Mike Perry is coming towards the end of his career because he's just not fighting the same way whatsoever anymore, and he wants a nice little gimme fight to get himself back in there, shake off the cobwebs, and get a good win, and then return to taking on top contenders. But I feel like against Mike Perry, man, it's not an easy matchup for Kevin Lee. Like, Mike Perry's takedown defense is extremely underrated, and I feel like he might have a chance of stuffing those takedowns of Kevin Lee. Then on the feet, it could get quite interesting. I would pick Kevin Lee to win this by decision, purely because Mike Perry just does not seem to have testosterone in him anymore to really grit down, and he doesn't have the mohawk, he just doesn't seem like the same guy anymore, man. He seems like a softer version of Mike Perry than he was before, and I don't know how else to explain it. I don't think it's entirely a skill thing. It's just a willingness to throw yourself into the fire in order to land shots on your opponent, as opposed to him just sitting on the outside and getting his head popped back non-stop like he did against Daniel Rodriguez. After Vicente Luque caved in his nose, he just hasn't really had that same grit to just charge head first into opponent's fire and risk himself being KO'd in order to be successful in a fight. And I feel like that would really bite him in the Kevin Lee matchup. I don't like that matchup to be made. I feel like I agree with Mike Perry. He should not be returning on July 10th. That's a terrible idea, which means maybe a bit later on in the year, maybe around the August card, we could have Mike Perry versus Kevin Lee. Definitely don't want to see Mike Perry back in there in only about 6 or 7 weeks. 8 weeks, actually, sorry. Since he got pieced up by Daniel Rodriguez. But if Kevin Lee wants to move back to the 170 pound division, let's have that conversation, because Kevin Lee did not just stop at calling out Mike Perry. He finished off by calling out, who was it? Robbie Lawler, he called out. He actually called out Robbie Lawler on his Twitter recently. He wonders what Ruthless Robbie Lawler is doing in July. And Ruthless Robbie Lawler said that he's ready to make a comeback real soon. There's also talks about Robbie Lawler taking on Nick Diaz, Robbie Lawler taking on Carlos Condit in a rematch. But again, Robbie Lawler coming off a loss, ranked right now in the welterweight division. That is a matchup that could be made. I wouldn't even mind too much. I just don't want Kevin Lee at welterweight. I feel like he can make lightweight, and I'm sick of there being an excuse as to why he can't. It annoys me a little bit with Kevin Lee. He is the frame of a lightweight person. There are people at lightweight like Islam Makhachev, Khabib Nurmagomedov, not anymore but was before, and other bigger guys in that division that genuinely just look like bigger people than Kevin Lee. I don't know where he thinks he's got this weight from. I just think he doesn't have the discipline to make it down to 155 pounds in a safe manner. He needs to trim down his overall size. A lot of fighters just talk about how they're going to change the way they do their weight cut, or change how long before the fight they do their weight cut for, or just change a couple of things in their diet or something like that. But I feel like what Kevin Lee really needs to do, rather than moving back up to 170 pounds where he lost before against Rafael dos Anjos, he needs to really just consider to himself, right, I can lose half a centimeter of circumference off of my bicep. I can do these things. I can lose a centimeter circumference off of my thigh. He can lose little bits of weight here and there to make himself into a better weight-cutted lightweight and do better against certain opponents. Now, he also said in his tweet that he feels like he deserves an Oliveira rematch. Absolutely fucking delusional, but that's Kevin Lee for you. He really does continue to be himself. And even though himself is delusional and retarded, it's still him being himself, I imagine. So, it's very interesting that he feels like he deserves an Oliveira rematch. A lot of bullshit happened around that fight. I know there was a lot of changes, but the same changes went on for Oliveira as well. I assume that Kevin Lee's talking about the fact that the whole world went crazy and they had to move the entire event and they were doing it in front of no fans for the first time. But all of that same stuff happened to Charles Oliveira, so it's not really an excuse for Kevin Lee to lose to Charles Oliveira. Either way, he doesn't deserve a rematch against Oliveira, and I think right now maybe what he's considering when he thinks he wants to move up to the welterweight division is that he's looking at the lightweight rankings and he's thinking to himself, right, these are all really difficult matchups for me because I know Rafael Fiziev's been calling him out and Kevin Lee is not responding to that whatsoever. But I think there's good matchups for Kevin Lee. If Kevin Lee called out Dan Hooker for the McGregor card in July, the fight's happening. That fight will happen if he does do that. I just don't know why he's not calling out these other lightweights, and I think it's maybe because he's looking at the top of the division and he's spotting a lot of people that have wins over him, like Charles Oliveira, like Rafael dos Anjos. Maybe he's got a phobia of Brazilians or something like that, like Tony Ferguson, who right now is at number 5. There's a lot of people inside the welterweight division that have wins over Kevin Lee, but if Kevin Lee wins, listen, Greg Gillespie just moved above you, and Gillespie might go on to do a real good run in the lightweight division. Why not stay there? Get the matchup with Dan Hooker, maybe just out-grapple him and smash him on the ground for 5 rounds or 3 rounds or however long it is, and then get right back up the top and look for Islam Makhachev's and look for even like a Chandler coming off a loss or something like that. Like, there's so many matchups still to make for Kevin Lee at lightweight, but he wants to move up to welterweight. He's calling out Robbie Lawler. I understand why. In my opinion, I reckon he's just looking for a gimme fight to come back to. Everyone knows that Robbie Lawler is not the same anymore. He has not been the same for a while. He just does not seem like he wants to win often in fights, especially the Neil Magny one. That one was just so embarrassing to watch. Don't get me wrong, Neil Magny beat him, and well done Neil Magny, but the Robbie Lawler in the Neil Magny fight was just... You thought that Robbie Lawler showed up bad against Colby Covington by just bobbing and weaving the entire time while Colby beat the shit out of him, basically, for 5 rounds. Magny fight was like he just did not even... He threw a couple of head kicks in a row in round 3, but he just did not even want to be in there with Neil Magny. Like, just give me my show money and I'll get out of your way, basically, is what Robbie Lawler was saying. But Kevin Lee, looking forward to his comeback. I don't mind the idea of him taking on an unranked lightweight. Listen, Donald Cerrone right now is ranked number 15 in the lightweight division. Wait, no longer. Sorry, Drew Dober's now moved above him because Cerrone lost to Morono in a different division, which makes ultimate sense. Otherwise, they'd have to admit that Makhachev hasn't beat a single ranked opponent. Other than that, Cerrone is still somewhat highly ranked in the lightweight division outside the rankings. If Kevin Lee called him out, I'm sure a matchup would be made. I just think that stay at lightweight, Kevin Lee, man. God, trim some fucking weight. There are bigger men than you in that division that make weight all the time. It's you. It's not the weight classes. It's not that there's no 165-pound division where. It's you not being disciplined enough to cut the weight, dude. You can make 100... You're not even the biggest 155-pounder. That's just not the case. Like, Dan Hooker used to make 145, and he's bigger than you at 155. It's not a weight class situation. Discipline yourself. Get your little gimme fight in the welterweight division. I'd recommend a Nicholas Dalby, who's quite highly ranked because he got a gifted decision against Daniel Rodriguez that he shouldn't have ever won. And now D-Rod has moved up the rankings, so has Nicholas Dalby. Look for a Nicholas Dalby fight, because that could be an easy win for you. But then get back to work, right back down in the lightweight division, and look for Paul Felder. Paul Felder right now, still ranked, would be okay to take a fight. I'm sure he'd love to fight on the big spotlight of the McGregor card as well. Kevin Lee versus Paul Felder opens up the McGregor pay-per-view main card easily. Feature fight of the McGregor pay-per-view main card. Like, whatever it wants to be. Like, Kevin Lee has name value. Call out other names that are going to get you in good positions. Like an Alexander Hernandez who's coming off a loss. I know these lot... Actually, fuck that one. Fuck that one. Diego Ferreira is not going to be able to turn around. Not Alexander Hernandez, even though he is quite highly ranked and inside the top 20. I feel like he needs to take on a ranked opponent, coming off a loss, or an up-and-comer coming off a win. I think what he should do is take Paul Felder, maybe also look at Diego Ferreira if he can make the turnaround, which I doubt Diego Ferreira can. But start looking at the Dan Hookers, man. Dan Hooker needs an opponent. He feels entitled to a top contender, which I don't think he's earned, because I think right now they're going to make Gaethje versus Rafael Dos Anjos next. Let's just do Kevin Lee versus Dan Hooker, or someone versus Makhachev, for God's sakes, inside the rankings, because I'm sick of these little games. I want to go up to welterweight for a fight with Mike Perry. You're top 15 at lightweight. You're not taking on number 50 Mike Perry in the welterweight division. That's just not how it works, okay? You don't get those little gimme ones back. Maybe Robbie Lawler, he's a ranked contender. We'll see if Lawler accepts it. But I just thought I'd give my thoughts on the whole situation. But right now, if I was Mike Perry, I'm not looking for a Kevin Lee matchup. I think that Kevin Lee probably would be able to beat him on the feet and win like a 29-28 unanimous decision after a risky first round or something like that. But if I was Mike Perry, I'm not looking at Kevin Lee whatsoever. I'm looking at names like, and I'm going to really maybe offend Mike Perry when I read some of these names. I'm looking for names like, let me scroll down a little bit more, Court McGee, Takashi Sato, David Zawada, maybe not even David Zawada, risky contender still, Stefan Sekulic, who just lost to Dwight Grant, Kenan Song. These kind of names are who I'm looking for Mike Perry, like a Sasha Politnikov. I'm going to go even further down. Emil Meek. Emil Meek should be the next opponent for Mike Perry. I should be the matchmaker. Kevin Lee, Dan Hooker, or Kevin Lee, Paul Felder, or shut up. And also, Mike Perry versus Emil Meek. No matchup between them. Like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Click that button up there. I thought I'd just run down what's going on right now because that news really took me off guard. Toodle pip.